How's it go? Let's go! Right, Marcus? Is that the way it goes?
It's going.
It's one of those weeks, right? Let me turn down the volume so I'm not like making everyone listen to super loud music the entire time. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Confab. Look at this, Marcus. I actually have my screen. Like I've got a background. I'm feeling more normal now.
Yeah, you're back at the resort.
I know, right? I've got the wonderful ocean that's beside me. I got the green
Yeah.
screen set up. It's awesome. So, lots and lots of fun. How's your week been, Marcus?
It's been busy, not like crazy busy, but it's been full, which is good. It's been a good week. Lot of prospect meetings this week.
Oh yeah,
How
a
about
lot
you?
about the same. A lot of business that wants to be closed right before the new fiscal year. So it's been quite a bit of fun to be involved with a lot of the opportunities that we've been working on. So it's busy though. I'll
Yeah.
take it. Right. There's always the rush I think in Q3 Q4 that we typically face right as people are coming back from summer. I would say this summer was actually a little bit quieter than last because obviously with COVID, people wanted to go travel a little bit. It felt like,
Yep, I
and a
think so
lot of
too.
people are taking vacations. So it's pretty good. So
Yep.
today, what are we talking about today?
We are looking at the Wave 2 release.
Yeah.
So what is that? 2021 Wave 2 release for Dynamics 365.
Wow. Well, that should be fun. Hopefully, people are kind of loading in on chat. If so, make sure to introduce yourself. As with Confab, if you guys have any questions as we go through this, make sure to spam them in the chat. Tell us about your day. Tell us about your week. Anything cool or exciting that you saw or heard. We'd love to hear it, and we'd love to be able to help as well if you do have any questions. It's almost like free consulting time, right, Marcus? That's the way I always look at it.
Well, someone said once we're always free. The pre-sales team is free, right?
Yeah, might as well use the pre-sales team, right, for anything that needs to get done. All
Yep.
right, well, we've got a lot of content to go through, so let's go ahead and get going. I know, Marcus, that you've got some stuff on Business Central with the new release that we want to go through, and then I'm looking at covering the finance and operations apps, sales, marketing, customer service. I don't know how much we're going to get through. We may have to actually make a multiple event right with this where we actually go into more detail on the Dataverse apps as well. So should be fun though. We're looking
Yep.
forward to it, right?
Yeah,
So
I've got a nice small piece here, so
and
I guess you got the heavy lifting today.
well, sadly, I got a hard cutoff too at noon. I think last time we did this, we extended it and we went a half an hour more. We're not
Yep.
going to be able to do that today, sadly. So it
All
is
right.
what it is. Let me go ahead and share the screen real quick here, Marcus. Here we
All
go.
right.
Hey, Dave. Hey, Leah. You are live, Marcus.
All right. Hey, so looking just at Business Central again, 2021 Wave 2 release. Couple things just to note. I continue to draw or direct people to the Dynamics 365 roadmap. Go check it out. Microsoft is pretty forthright about what feature functionality is coming out, where certain features have been slated out into the future. It's not set in stone in any sense, but at least you're going to get some idea of product development, product direction. There is a way on that site too to log in, and you can actually submit enhancement requests. You can vote on enhancements that other people have requested in the system as well. There are actually a couple of enhancements that in this release, again, just like we saw last time, that are really the direct result of feedback from clients and users. So really encourage you to check that out. The other thing I noticed in reading the release notes of this release is Microsoft's use of telemetry in and around Business Central.
Yep.
Some of these enhancements are a direct result of errors or issues that Microsoft has detected that people just in general have. So I was really intrigued that one, Microsoft actually said that, but two, they are doing it. So they are not in the sense of a big brother monitoring your system, but I think that's really one of the advantages of a SaaS offering is where people continue to maybe have stumbling issues. And the one specific enhancement is about that. I would say it's not an error necessarily. It's a setup thing that people continually get messages about, and Microsoft put some enhancements in to deal with that. So you're learning and actually I don't know, crowdsourcing. It's almost like we're helping each other with the product. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I've seen a lot actually, ironically, on that as well, Marcus, on that exact point. On the F&O side, like there's performance improvements that they've added
Yes.
based upon feedback that they've received in the environments, more specifically around telemetry. So
Yep.
it absolutely is a benefit, right, as we go through this process to be on the same platform, to be on the same version, to then have those updates roll out to you. It's just a beautiful thing in so many ways.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I had
So
one other thing to say too. Sorry, Marcus.
sure.
Chat, I want you guys to find NetSuite, Infor, or another product that gives a roadmap like this that we get to go through every single fall and spring, right? We've made a theme around this because initially, way back in the day, we go 5 years ago, this didn't exist, right,
Nope.
Marcus? I mean, this
Nope.
is we would
Sketchy maybe.
yeah, right. We get
Yep.
release notes, and now we get like, hey, here's the features. Like on today's session, I get to talk about a new feature state that they have called On by Default, and they're going into the feature plans, and they're saying, for example, when the release is going to be mandatory or when it's going to be on by default. I mean, this release notes they go out to 2022 at this point. If you look at the details with it, I thought that was pretty cool,
Yep.
Marcus. Sorry, I had to
Yep.
interject that.
I agree. I agree, Scott. I think it's great. It's great for Microsoft. It's honestly, it's great for end users of the application. You clearly know that this application is being invested in. Microsoft is planning and they're really thinking about the application.
Yep,
Yep.
yep. Cool. Well, I
Okay.
won't steal your thunder. Here we go.
I'm gonna go through these pretty quick. I'm gonna highlight ones that I think are really cool. I don't know, maybe other ones are listed here that people like that I kind of downplay, but we'll just go through the list. Account schedules. So enhancements around account schedules. If you run an account schedule, you define a budget. What this is actually going to do is allow you to do filtering at columns for the budget. So if you've got a budget versus forecast kind of concept, you're going to be able to do that natively in an account schedule. I think it's great. Added columns in various pages. Scott, you and I have talked through this endlessly, right? Why aren't more columns available by default on pages so that the users can just go personalize and add them? Microsoft is listening. They're going through several common places, so you don't need an extension to add those columns. They're going to be available through personalization to add them. So awesome addition. They should continue to do more of that.
Yeah.
Non-inventory items on requisitions and planning sheets. If you use non-inventory items, there are some limitations around non-inventory items. Microsoft is trying to make that functionality more consistent with a regular inventory item. So that's a plus. Bank and payment reconciliations. Interesting that we continue to see enhancements every single update around bank and payment reconciliation. So Microsoft is making more updates to this application area. I think it's good, but they continue to enhance it, so it's great.
Hmm.
Honestly, doing bank recs in the system, major time saver. If you're not doing it, you need to do it.
Hey,
And it's amazed how many clients don't.
yeah, and I was thinking, Marcus. So I've obviously been used to like the NAV 2016 version where they did a bunch of enhancements to change the layout inside of it. Why is there so much focus on bank and payment rec? Is it just has it been something that they felt just needed to improve, or is it because of the new
Yeah.
automation features that they've been adding? Or
No, I think there's some real improvements. So there's some ability in here, for example, to undo some bank rec information. So if you
okay,
posted it, there's undo features, which is not common in Business Central in general. So they're adding it around bank
I
reconciliations.
see. Okay, that makes it just
That's the
easier
kind of
then.
thing you're seeing. Yeah,
Okay,
ease
cool.
of use is what I would say.
Okay, cool. That makes
Yep,
sense.
yep. Coupling records between Business Central and Dataverse in bulk. This has been a huge need when you talk about integrating CE with Business Central. Current version, it's one by one. It's tedious, but you do it once and it's fine. Adding the features to be able to do it in bulk. So awesome
Good,
enhancements.
good.
Default line type in sales and purchase document. They needed this from the very beginning. Common customization I've put in. I don't know about you, Scott, but if
On
you're an
in it.
organization that just does financial transactions, I want it to default to GL and I don't care about anything else, right? Finally added that. That's a direct result of customer feedback, by the way. So that's a good one. Edit in Excel and recurring journals and intercompany. So again, edit in Excel feature functionality being added more places out of the box. Group GL and VAT entries in preview posting. So if you're a user of preview posting, if you're new to the system, I encourage it. If you're doing things like VAT or intercompany transactions, make use of preview posting. Really helps you figure out how the system is configured. They're adding some grouping capabilities, which if again you use preview posting and they're long transactions, this will help you a lot. Improved user experience, posting setup and dimensions issues. Okay, so this is the enhancement directly as a result of the telemetry settings. So if you're in Business Central, when you set up a new location, you set up a new item, you set up a new item category. Oftentimes the posting, you don't set it up, right? People forget to do it.
Hmm.
You get errors throughout the system as you're posting transactions. And honestly, sometimes, unless you know the system, knowing that it's as easy as going to inventory posting setup and making those entries, it's easy to fix. It's just most people don't know where to look. So Microsoft has made some direct improvements around the setup of that. So users are very quickly directed to setting up those posting groups. So ease of use in terms of just eliminating some of those odd messages that you're going to get because of the setup.
Yep.
So I love it.
That makes sense.
Integration with Business Central and Dataverse more efficient. So currently, when you make changes to the system, what you end up with is a transaction by transaction synchronization. So I update a customer, it updates a customer. It update a contact, it updates a contact. What this is actually going to do is allow the synchronization of multiple records together. So the whole process is going to be more efficient. So if I'm making multiple changes, they're not going to be sequentially lined up. I'm going to be able to group those essentially so that they happen in one transaction. So just faster, more efficient, particularly on larger data sets.
Yeah, and that's nice. I mean, from a Dataverse perspective, I mean, we've talked about this. The writing is absolutely on the wall in terms of that coupling of
Yep.
BC and Dataverse. We've said it so many times. I am still amazed, Marcus, on how many partners out there still just focus entirely on doing it inside of BC instead of enabling Dataverse and using the other tools that are out there. Like it's still not where it needs to be, and I'm hoping like things like this where it makes it more efficient so that when you have large amounts of records, you're not having, for example, any delays in the processing. I've never seen that, to be quite honest, but anything that helps with that performance I think is a benefit.
Yeah, and I think what they're doing is they're future proofing this product a little bit, if you will, right?
Exactly.
They're building for those larger data sets that may or may not actually be using the system yet, but when they're there, we'll be ready for it.
Yep.
Item variant code on demand forecast. Variants are a little dicey anyway, but they're going to be a part of the demand forecast.
They didn't have that before?
No.
Wow, I forgot
The,
about that.
yeah, the variant isn't there.
Hmm.
Historical tracking on bank account changes. This has to do with when you drill into a transaction, let's say historical transaction, because you actually update the bank account, it's kind of an obscure update, but it'll be nice just to know you're not going to get like a missing record kind of thing when you
Yeah. Yep.
so that's what's going to happen.
Yep.
Locations for non-inventory items, again, upping the functionality around non-inventory items. More control over address information for data entry. So if you're a Business Central user, you know that there's some ability to link, let's say, city, state, zip code together. And if you start doing that, sometimes you kind of get yourself wound around a stick a little bit on that setup. So Microsoft is kind of changing how that address validation works around the system. So I think again, it's a more of a user enhancement piece. I think this one also was a direct result of telemetry. Microsoft is detecting people are having issues with this, so they're making some changes there.
Well, the addresses have always classically inside of Nav and BC always been kind of a sticking point when you're entering in
Yeah.
data, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when I was first introduced into the F&O environment, you'd put in, for example, a zip code, the county, the state, the city, all that detail would automatically populate. So it was just like, well, why don't we do that in BC? So that's good to hear that they're at least taking those concepts and starting to introduce more into things that just make it easier, to your point.
Right. More control over currency rate adjustments. So this allows you to get to, let's say, a currency adjustment to a particular vendor or a particular customer. They're adding some filters to that, so it's not update like doing currency rate adjustments against the currency. I can get more specific about what I'm going to process against. So if you're using multi-currency, it's a nice enhancement. Automated APIs for creation of user groups. So Microsoft continues to enhance the API components. You can set up environments, companies, you can make application changes, configuration packages, user permissions, and now they're adding the ability to create user groups. So
That's awesome.
just more enhancements around that too. Let's see, production bombs and routings on stock keeping units in planning scenarios. So more enhancements around the planning engine again with stock keeping units. Like variant stock keeping units are a little dicey, but we're adding some additional functionality around there. Removing some reports. I forget what those reports exactly are, but they're some of the older reports around invoicing, I think. So those are going to go away. Rounding setups for the base unit of measure, big deal when you talk about, if you start selling fractional items and you get yourself kind of in a weird spot, there's some rounding settings that you can do.
Yeah.
Tours of Business Central to help users know the basics. So Microsoft continues to add, I would say, end user help. It's not exactly help. It is this tour concept. So when I click on a new screen, it'll pop up kind of in the lower left-hand corner. If you turn it on, you can shut that off too. But if you turn it on, it helps users know, not in a help sense, but more how to do something. So I think the tour is a better term. So helping with usability.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, this is so past due, Scott. I mean, we need applause everywhere. Timesheets in Business Central using assisted setup and data entry on mobile devices. So the timesheet is finally available on the phone. This is so past due. Honestly, it's an architect. Well, it's a design issue. So the grid form that Microsoft uses in the browser essentially doesn't render correctly on the app on the phone. They're finally fixing that. So people that have been waiting for time entry on the phone, finally, it's finally there, which is just awesome.
Hooray!
Yeah, I don't know, other than timesheets, I don't know of any major functional area that's now missing on the mobile device, which is awesome. Planning worksheets still obviously just screen real estate doesn't work.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, but in terms of, let's say, entering transactions, so time entry was the last real, I think, urgent one that needed to get done. So that's awesome. Multiple units of measure and syncing items and resources to Dynamics 365 sales. So again, an enhancement with the Dataverse CE connection. So unit of measure stuff going over on the items. Again, tours set up again. That's kind of a repeat. Delegated admin can create job queue entries and request approval. So what you're seeing is Microsoft is sort of expanding this admin concept. You're going to see it on the admin portal as well. The ability to sort of add some additional administrative features and assign those to users. This is about a job queue entry. So again, sort of a specialized, it's not, you don't have to be a super user then. You can sort of get in this medium tier to be able to do some of that, which is a big deal. Enhancements to Microsoft Teams integration. That's really a back-end, some back-end changes that Microsoft has made to the integration between Business Central and Teams. So again, related to performance primarily, but that's key there. Okay. Centralized deployment of Office add-ins. That's an end user thing inside of Business Central. So how do you deploy those applications? It's just change there. Enhancements to the Outlook add-on, primarily related to performance issues on the back end again. So making that work just more efficiently. Enhancements to working with Excel again on the back end of the application primarily. That edit in Excel feature, optimizing that. AL API for shared files in Microsoft 365 again, continuing enhancements around the API. Sharing of a record link to Microsoft Teams. I think there's more that Microsoft could do, honestly, between Business Central and Teams. When you look at where it is, there's initial design concepts there. There's some initial building blocks that you go, okay, well, it does work. I don't know how, would I use it on a day-to-day basis? I don't know yet. But what we've got now is this shared record links into Teams. So it's going to be a better experience if I take a particular record, post it to a Teams channel, and you're going to get a direct link to it. It's not just a URL link anymore. It's more than that. So you're going to get an image and that sort of thing. So I think more usable integration between Teams and Business Central.
Yeah, and I'll have some to share with that a little bit more on the Dataverse or the model-driven apps, more specifically D365 sales. Like, it felt like this release was a huge Teams push that they had with it. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Just on chat real quick too. Hooray for timesheets. I don't know. I don't know if anyone's hurraying for that. Everyone loves
No one
timesheets,
was?
right? No one's hurraying for it. I didn't see it in chat. And then Deb,
Oh my gosh.
if it goes fuzzy and then gets clear, it's bandwidth. You need a faster internet connection, Deb. Sorry. All right, let's keep rolling. Sorry.
So no one loves timesheets.
I know, I
Really?
know. I didn't get anything in chat. No one was like, "This is great."
All right.
Come on, Ted. Tell us how great it is. Tell us how great it is.
Country and regional support. So, for all the people that go, who cares? I think this is a big deal. So when we talk about multinational organizations, and we continue to work with more and more organizations that are in Central America, they're in South America, they're in Europe. This regional support's a big deal. The one that really hits me this time is Puerto Rico. So, a lot of U.S. based companies have operations in Puerto Rico. They actually have a lot of operations in the Ukraine too. So those are big deals for Business Central. As I always say, more people on Business Central helps everybody on Business Central. So
Yep.
every time there's another customer using the product, it's just going to be more important that Microsoft pays attention to the product. So that's awesome for us all. Development, I just lumped all these together. I wasn't going to go through a lot of very specific things in here, but what you're going to see is more enhancements around AL. So that's a good thing again for everybody. Quite frankly, extensions were, I'm going to say 90% baked out, right? We continue to get more and more enhancements around extension development. It's just going to be better, which is
Yeah.
great. Documentation is a big one, which is the number one, but profiling, the synchronization of extensions on premise, which is a big deal for those. I like number 4, extended general ledger posting. Microsoft has, if I understand this correctly, broken up the posting routine a little bit for GL posting, which is going to allow you to insert extensions in more places. So,
Okay.
in the old days, we used to be able to take that code unit apart, right? And honestly, being able to tweak that general ledger posting, pretty common, right? When you wanted to make some other changes in the system. With extensions, you, again, event based, you really had the beginning and end of that posting routine that you could get to. Splitting this apart a little bit might give us some more functionality during the posting process. So I'd say yay for this. It's going to help us long term.
Yep.
Performance included performance, the non-clustered indexes. That's a big deal when you talk about tweaking performance around the application. Getting in more and more questions about that from prospects about what does Microsoft do about performance. I think there's a direct result of some things that they're doing.
Exactly.
Governance and administrative, updating dependencies. So this first one, so when you update an extension, you've got a dependent extension. It can do those automated processes together, which is nice. More support for Azure Active Directory groups. It's not going to get to security yet, but we'll see what happens. Admins can schedule tasks at a point in time for a restore, so more functionality again in that admin portal, which is good. Copying environments to different types, awesome. Operation and logs, restart environments. This is a big one when if you're primarily if you're in like a development phase, something like that, or you just do something, you really hose up the environment. Microsoft is adding the ability for you to actually do a restart on your environment.
Well, that's pretty cool. That's especially sandbox. I mean, if you're going through and doing active development and using the cloud-hosted sandboxes, there have been situations that I'm just like, well, how do I fix this? Like it won't recover, or it won't do what it's supposed to do, right? So that's good to hear. And Dave Stallman just said the sales team's gonna be tracking their time now, Marcus. I don't know about that. I have to noodle on that one for a little bit.
Oh, really? So I have to move to another department.
I didn't say it. I didn't say it. All right. Power Platform.
Power Platform. If you've used Power BI, you know that you end up in a goofy workplace when you set them up. So Microsoft is finally opening this up so that you can pick from different workspaces. Should have been done from the beginning, but it's taken care of. Performance improvements on the Business Central web client, always a good thing. Unhindered data entry across rows. This is a weird description, but basically, if you're familiar with the old nav, the way that the rows worked in nav,
the multi-line feature.
You could do copies. You could do copy from the field above or the row above. They're finally building all that into Business Central. They're also changing. Sorry, I'm taking way longer than I thought.
That's okay. That's okay.
They're also changing the way that the records are being saved as you move between lines. So currently in Business Central, if you're working with a longer list, you'll notice there's sometimes a delay as I move between row one and row two. Microsoft is changing that. So essentially it's caching row one, it'll start row two, it'll save row one in the background and not hinder you from starting to do data entry on row two. So nice things in terms of those longer data sets. Reports. If you're in Europe, there's keyboard matches your separator, so comma, period, all
Yep.
that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Ease of use stuff. Service platform stuff. I'm not going to go into that, but there are some enhancements on the back end of the system as well, and that's what I had.
That's quite a
So
bit. That's quite a
yeah,
bit in the release, right? For content that they have, which is pretty awesome to see.
yeah. Honestly, I was a little disappointed in the last release. I had hoped for more. In this release, when I look at it, I think Microsoft has I think stepped up the game a little bit with this enhancement release. You'd also talked about that feature management piece. Business Central has that in the application. So when you get an update, there are some things that aren't automatically turned on,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to go to feature management, and then you can enable those features. So
Mm-hmm.
similar to what you had talked about with F&O.
That's awesome. That is very
Yeah.
awesome. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and flip over to the F&O stuff and also the Dataverse stuff too for our conversation. So let me go ahead, trying to manage like 6 screens at once here. We're gonna go ahead and flip it over. Look at that. I've got my fighter planes again, Marcus. What I'll do for you, Marcus, is I'll share my screen so you can see it too. So after I figure out how to do that. So Marcus, in the words of Adam, it's time for some vamping for a quick second. What would
I
you
think
say of those features is your favorite?
of those features, that's an interesting one. Well, I have to go with timesheets because I have been an advocate for timesheets on the mobile device. We need it. When you talk about a mobile user, you can get a Teams license with the mobile user. It's all queued up to do it, and we couldn't do it. So now now we can, which is great.
That is awesome. All right,
Yep.
I had you on full screen for everyone to see you. Here we go. We've got the new area here. All right, let's jump in. So Enterprise Wave 2 highlights with Dynamics 365. Marcus, can you see my screen just to make sure
Yep.
you can see that I
Yep.
didn't waste all that effort for nothing?
Oh my
Uh,
God.
Continuing on here. So let's go through finance and operations. So I want to have a quick conversation at a high level here just to level set on really where things are at with finance and operations, right? There's so many times that I hear people say FinOps and then they say finance and supply chain management. Like we got to get our terms right here. So I want to kind of level set with that and go through that. First off, I've done this on a couple other PowerPoints that we've done too, Marcus. I know that you've seen that. But the core concept here is that there's a finance and operations apps. So let's start there, right? So that is basically a bunch of other Dynamics 365 apps that are in that grouping of finance and operations apps. The core concept that I want to communicate with it is that when you start talking about finance and operations, this is where you're not developing in Power Platform. You're using Visual Studio and X++ to go through and do the coding for that. You're not having Dataverse as your backend. You're using the finance and operations apps database backend, which is technically SQL Server, but you never
Right.
see that because just like BC, it's covered, right,
Yep.
from a technical perspective. And generally speaking, a lot of the ERP-ish type of applications in Dynamics 365 are built on that on that platform, so on the finance and operations platform. So we call that finance and operations apps. So what are the apps? Finance, supply chain management, project operations, commerce, right? Those are the actual applications that we have then that are built on that particular platform, right? So when you start hearing, and actually there's one more too, I think human resources is technically now on here as well. But these are, when we talk about finance and operations, it's no longer Dynamics 365 finance and operations. It's Dynamics 365 finance. It's not Dynamics 365 finance and operations, right? And that's one thing I just want to clarify as we go into this, because when we start talking about like cross-app features that are being added, when you click on the Dynamics 365 finance and operations section that then breaks out finance, supply chain, and the others, you don't understand that really the cross app applies to all of these products then as part of that, right? So it's a pretty big differentiator as part of that conversation. So
Yeah, and this is not how Business Central works.
no, not at all,
Yep.
right? So
Right.
BC is all these together because it's an
Correct.
SMB solution. So they're not modularizing it basically. Like I wouldn't be surprised, Marcus, if we see within the next year or so Dynamics 365 fixed assets. Like I mean, it would make so much sense to take some of these app services and separate them even more because what's happening here is that you can actually implement, for example, D365 supply chain management without implementing finance. Like that's a concept that's coming out more and more often, and that's why those release notes are broken out like that. But remember, I mean, you're going to lose features such as like in supply chain management. If you just have that license, you can't invoice, right? Because invoicing is actually a finance function basically inside of the finance and operations apps environment. So just know that's where they're going when you're looking at those plans, the docs that are out there for the release wave plans. This hopefully will help you kind of align a little bit more with that conversation. So
Yep.
that
And
being
maybe
said,
in the future we'll see Dynamics Project Server, for example, connecting to Business Central.
exactly right,
Yep.
right,
Yep. Not
yeah,
there today.
but maybe soon, right?
Yep.
We're
That's
seeing,
right.
and there's some other things too that I can't talk about that are under NDA, such as very high level. Think about concepts like you have one programming interface to update both environments. Like imagine things like that as concepts. If you're an ISV and you make a configurator, you've got to make a configurator for model-driven apps, for canvas-driven apps, and then also for FinOps apps, right? Well, imagine you had one interface for that could update any of those, right? So there's a lot of cool stuff that's coming down the pike. But let's get to the cross app features here. So remember, these apply to all the finance and operations apps that I listed on that prior slide, right? You can look at these as general platform updates, but I always view these as some of the most impactful updates that we see then on finance and operations apps because they're generally focused on interface, on integration, and on the development capabilities of the platform itself, right? So it's not as much functional. So I know that there's going to be some functional users that are on this conversation. These are more of just making it easier, right, for you to be able to go through and do a lot of the transactions that you have inside of your environment. So when we
Actually,
start,
that's a
yep,
good point, Scott. I,
yeah,
I think sometimes we get so focused during an update on what the end user experience is, and there's a lot of infrastructure changes and development that have to happen in these applications to support future growth. And when we look at all new feature functionality, we need to think about both of those components.
exactly.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
really, we know it's really cool, Marcus. I was on a call today that all of a sudden, remember how we said data is the center of everything, right?
Yep.
And how we interact with that data matters. On a call, I just heard from a larger company. They're like, yeah, data is one of our corporate investments that we're focusing on for this year. So it was just like, hey, our predictions, remember, we're getting to the
Yep.
prediction time frame almost too. It's aligning obviously with what Microsoft is doing here. So a couple of the things, excuse me, from a finance and operations cross app capability, obviously Visual Studio 2019. It's nice to use the new tools that are out there. And we haven't been able to use Visual Studio 2019 with X++ support with it. So that's obviously a nice new feature that's there. There's also, remember from a feature management point of view, when we talk about the enterprise-based systems, we want to minimize the impact that a new feature has on a production environment, right? And I know in
This is a big
BC,
deal.
exactly right, and BC is starting to adopt the same way with it.
Yes.
It pushed on the enterprise side on purpose because you can imagine when you implement an enterprise system, you've got so many processes that need validation, right? And when you
Correct.
do an upgrade, you need to revalidate those, especially if you have an impact with it. So
Yep.
there's a couple new updates that they've done. They have a new state called On by Default that really allows for you to see the writing on the wall, meaning that they used to go from released, preview released, and then they had mandatory, and there was no middle ground where all of a sudden somebody was told, hey, the next release, more than likely, that's going to be mandatory. So this on by default helps you understand then that that feature in the feature management section really is getting close to being mandatory moving forward here. The other aspect that's really important is that when we talk about like save view updates, so they put a whole new view system inside of finance and operations apps, and they've done some cool updates to that. More specifically, you used to be able to do views that were really specific then to your personal views or a global view that you could share with people. You can now do it legal entity specific as well now, which is a really cool concept where you can per legal entity create either personal or even shared views or global views as they call them as a feature with that. And here's an example then of that feature state being used with release notes. So here's an example where they're saying GA is on version 21, which is this wave release that we're talking about. On our next release, April 2022, is actually the 10.025 release, and it's going to be on by default. And then obviously at 1029, which is going to be the fall release in October, it's going to be mandatory to have that type of feature. So this is a concept when you're going through the documents, the notes on the release waves. Check this out. A lot of the features are now starting to have these feature stages. It just helps you understand a little bit more of what's happening in the environment, which is pretty critical.
Yep. And some time to do adoption.
Exactly. Exactly. So I always list this. We don't have to go through the details of it, but remember, with each version now, the last version that we did, there are mandatory features that are enabled, and then there were released that will be upgraded to mandatory. Well, now we've got the on by default, right? So there's going to be a bunch of new controls here and updates that are going to be pushed as mandatory, and then by default, there's a bunch that are going to be on too when you go through your upgrade lifecycle. Now, the nice thing about the on by default is that you get the opportunity to not enable it if you don't want to. So you can actually not enable that as you go through your upgrade process, right? So that's the key, is that if you want to minimize the impact, you can go by the on by defaults and make sure that they're not enabled. But remember, this version, probably they're going to be mandatory, right? That's the thing I want to communicate there as part of that process. Some of the other cross-app features that are being added, the workspaces. We're moving away from the horizontal panorama scrolling now into vertical scrolling. So Windows 8, when they actually did Rainier AX7, they actually had it where some of the initial releases looked like the Windows 8 start screen. If you remember that thing that you could flip to the left and you could click on the boxes and get to that detail. They're like, hey, nope, we're done with that. We're going to go and make this so now that those sections scale up and down. So I don't know if that means if they're going to have an option for you to either have one or the other, but they're looking at taking those panorama sections and then stacking them vertically moving forward here. So that's
is that a preview of what we're going to see in Windows 11?
Well, right. Maybe only if you have TPM though. Only if you have TPM, right? So change feeds and data lakes. This, Marcus, this got me really excited. A chronological log of all data changes that happen in the F&O apps environment. So we're talking commerce, finance, supply chain. Imagine this. So we talk about blockchain, and about when we go through a blockchain, we can see exactly everything that happened in a wallet, basically, as you go through and you buy and sell crypto. Well, imagine now that you've got a data feed that goes to Data Lake that has every single transaction that's being entered, every create, update, delete transaction that's occurring inside of the environment, and it's going into Data Lake. So now what I can do is I can consume that data lake feed, and I can use Synapse to have more reporting off of it. I can, for example, use Stream Analytics that takes that stream and then does actions that are based upon data events that occur. This I thought was pretty dang cool from an enterprise perspective. Like if you think about a major feature that can help you on your auditing of a data environment, that one to me is just absolutely huge with that. So a really cool feature there. I'm just trying to find some.
I feel like another confab coming out on just that one.
Oh, I could have fun with that one, right? Like streams, and we did this with IoT as well as part of some of our conversations. So
yeah, this would be interesting though. Okay.
Dual Right supports 250 legal entities. We supported 40 before. Now we have 250. Oh, it's a cool feature, I thought, but it's like I don't know of any customers that I have at this point that I've talked to that have 250 legal entities. I'm sure it exists, obviously. Otherwise they wouldn't have added it. Yeah.
I did a BC demo. We had 112, I think.
112 legal entities inside of it? Wow. Yeah. That's pretty major.
They're looking at it, so we'll see what happens.
Okay, right. So F&O and Dataverse Phase 5. So last one I did the Phase 4. I skipped the Marvel story with it. Basically, what they looked at here is that they're looking at the operational improvements along with the demo experience. So we'll talk a little bit more about this because there's some Power Platform concepts that they've introduced here.
Yeah.
Basically, they're making dual write better from the orchestration perspective. So that way, there's less errors. It's easier to manage those errors. You can spin up demo instances that link to the Dataverse just automatically in the background. So they're really, this tightly coupling of Dataverse is coming closer and closer. And
That's
another aspect I thought was kind of cool, virtual tables inside of the Dataverse environment that reference F&O data. Imagine you build a mobile offline app inside of
yep.
Dataverse. Virtual entities now that reference F&O can work in offline mode, which
That's really cool.
I thought, yeah, right. So,
Does that give us Power BI reporting capabilities too?
well, maybe like it could, because the virtual
Yeah.
entity layer, right? That was the big gap, is that they
Yep.
didn't have the lowest level, and I would expect inside of here that that would have to possibly be addressed with it. So there's going to be
Right. That's a big win.
ancillary, right, for that. Kind of going through here, some really cool news. Like I was saying, the Power Platform convergence, right? So I'm a big advocate of Power Platform, of Dynamics 365. Every demonstration that we go into, we typically start in sales, where we go lead, opportunity, and then we go all the way to orders inside of the supply chain management solution. But a couple of things that have been pain points are, for example, I've got to spin up and manage environments inside of LCS. Well, with this release, we are starting to see the transition of some of the features that exist inside of LCS. It's more duplication, is the way I would kind of summarize it at this point. But we're looking at the admin.powerplatform.com. Some of those features and details are now going to be exposed inside of that Dataverse environment, in that admin page for Power Platform. So just centralizing really where people go to do the administrative aspects of both Dataverse and also FinOps apps. This is going to be a really good one from that perspective. So they
It's
already
a little clumsy today.
Exactly, right? You got two different ones that you have to deal with. So this allows for auto creation of Dataverse environments that we have inside of here. The virtual entity setup, when you link the two environments, it used to be a manual operation that you'd have to go through and set up the virtual entities. With 1021, it automatically does it for you in the background when you link it. Users that access, for example, virtual tables, when they access it from a Power App and it references F&O data, it'll actually add the user then into the Dataverse environment, so you don't have to maintain two separate users or two separate security aspects where you have to manage adding users in Power Apps that access virtual entities into the Dataverse environment. It'll do it just in time as part of that, so that's a pretty cool feature in that regard. Business events now. The business events that you actually create inside of finance and operations are now exposed as well inside of Dataverse. So as you recall from Power Automate, like you can actually set what your endpoint is going to be, and there was an F&O connector that was there, and then you could subscribe to a business event. Well, now you can do that from a Dataverse perspective. So if you have plugins and codes like that you want to generate, that'll work with it. I've got, well, that was interesting. And then we've got cut events, create, update, and delete events that are available with OData enabled data entities. So if you have an OData enabled data entity, the create, update, and delete events that are actually inside of finance and operations apps are going to be here as well. So really cool in that regard to bring some more of that coupling basically from the Power Platform perspective as we go through this. Kind of going to the functional aspects of it. So from a Dynamics 365 finance perspective, first off, a new feature creating collection activities based upon the payment predictions that are out there. So we've had this customer payment prediction capability that's been in preview. What they've now done with it is that they've said, hey, if we have a prediction that a customer invoice is going to be late, based upon rules that you set up inside of the system, we can automatically create a collection activity inside of D365 Finance so that you can then follow up and go through a collections process even before it's late. So you can start monitoring what you're expecting off of that. And that's cool.
Is that the same AI engine that Business Central is using?
It is. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that's I think that's an important concept for people to get is
Yep.
that it's essentially an application that is shared between the two systems.
Yep.
Correct.
Yep, exactly. The same.
Yeah.
So it's an ML model, a machine learning
Yep.
model, basically. And everyone at Stone Ridge now knows all about machine learning because they created their own apps with it, right? Which is pretty cool.
Yep.
End result, though, is that the finance capability now allows, obviously, for us to harness that customer payment prediction and actually do stuff with it, which is a
Yep.
pretty cool aspect
And
in my mind.
is that Power Automate or is that really in finance?
It's in finance. Yep.
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
setup. And the reason for that typically is when you look at like some of the rules are percentage based, like so on time probability. Maybe you want the probability to be above 70% or lower than 8%. Actually, it'd be the opposite here, right? Where you would then create a activity case, whatever it is, inside of finance then to go through the collection activity process with it.
Okay.
So another aspect, ironically, I got asked this on a prospect call at one point. Positive asset depreciation used to be before we would have to usually flip the accounts that are used for an asset where we wanted
Yeah.
to fake positive depreciation.
Yep.
So now we have the ability to create a negative asset and then do positive depreciation against it. So
That's
pretty
cool.
cool. Yep, nice feature. Um, at vendor invoice automation updates, so one of the newer features that was introduced is this invoice automation. So you can actually take and match invoices so that they automatically post as part of their processing. So this also then allows for prepayment applications now. They've extended, for example, the length of invoice numbers, and then they can also process these while you're actually going through and doing imports. So basically, they're building out the AP automation functionality inside of D365 Finance. And then they've added some new services to really focus on performance. So, financial dimensions, when you're actually doing large journal imports, financial dimensions can actually be really slow in some ways. What they've done is they've actually abstracted a service that can actually run in the background that helps with this process, then that makes it more scalable. And then for year end, when you're going through your closing activities, for some large organizations, you want to be able to go quickly through that while they're adding year-end close services that are going to extend that capability. And really, all these are extensions on top of the base functionality. They're not like the fraud protection where you pay for it at this point,
Right.
but they're basically technologies that they're building on top of the existing for only highly scalable or highly performant dependent environments as they go through their processing. And then customer payment predictions, right? I want to just at least put there, even though the collection activities are there, that's coming out of preview, if I remember correctly, and it's getting more into general availability now for this release. For supply chain, so now we've flipped over. This is one of my favorite features on the D365 supply chain aspect. Edge scale enhancements. I know a lot of people don't use it, but at the same point, the adoption rate of this from a production perspective or a distribution perspective, I get every single time, Marcus, people saying, what happens if we lose internet? What happens
Yep.
if we go down? And on
Yep.
a small medium business, SMB, it's still critical. But enterprise, obviously, the investment that they have in the technology stack with it, it's critical for tier one applications to be able to basically keep processing when internet goes down or a disaster occurs. So
Yep.
edge scale is that technology that we use then to do that, where you can actually have edge scale units that bring the data closer then to where the users are interacting for picks putaways and for manufacturing operations. So you can have an edge scale unit in the cloud so you can geographically separate them, or you can have it on prem. And if you have it on prem, what's happening then is that when you do a lot of those mobile device activities, such as picks, putaways for work that happens on the distribution side of it, and then when you're doing production, recording receipt quantities, consuming, for example, products onto production and batch orders, they've added now those capabilities, right? So more enhancements to this edge scale capability so that way you can continue to operate when you don't have connectivity or even have more performance, right? Because we're decentralizing where we need to keep track of those transactions when we're doing picks and putaways. So it's not just a disaster recovery option, it's also for scalability and performance as well. So that's a very huge, I think for larger organizations, it's much needed in that regard.
Yeah. Well,
Adjustment
we need
re-
a solution with that with Business Central. We're
yeah.
we're asked that more and more.
Yep, it's something that's pretty common, right? So,
Yep.
and this I think just opens the door to the concept that people are like, yeah, I'd really like to have the data local. Or for large organizations that are international organizations, they don't want to have their data center in North America and then have to service all the way over in Slovakia. They want the data closer to that region so that they don't have that latency or that hiccup or any of those, downtime things that could happen in those situations. So, pretty cool in that regard. Adjustment reason codes, really simple concept. Hey, you know what? When you're doing an adjustment now, you don't have to enter in the account number. You can actually put a reason code and put what that account number is. So lost, damaged, and actually have it posted to the P&L better or more accurately. And then production floor execution updates. Guess what? We can now report progress on batch orders and report co-products and byproducts. Big issue that we've had. I've done demos many times on the job card terminal where I've got a batch order and I want to register co-products and I can't do it. Well, this production floor execution, which is really kind of the replacement for the job card terminal, allows for some of those new features to be there. So, like I said, I'm doing highlights. The other big highlight I want to announce here too as well for all of you, planning optimization now supports production. We'll see how good it does at production. As many of you probably know, MRP2, or our default planning engine that we run inside of supply chain, is being deprecated eventually. They're moving to this planning optimization model, and I know Stone Ridge has done a couple sessions on this with Ann Casey and a couple others that have gone through the planning optimization features, but the real limitation has been that they haven't been able to do production processing with it. So you can't do planned production orders or batch orders or capacity or finite capacity, as we would call it in the BC world as well. What they've done now is they've added those features into it. So now we do purchases, transfers, and production really as part of our planning optimization. So what this means is that you should, if you're using the planning capabilities and you're not using planning optimization yet because of those gaps that were there, know that this is now getting closer to a reality, which means that you need to have some type of transition plan that you need to start thinking through with that. So something just to note, kind of key as part of that. Getting more into the Dataverse apps, the project operations, not Dataverse yet. A couple things I want to announce with that. Number one, PSA. So a lot of people have asked about Dynamics 365. Is it project operations or is it PSA, project service automation? Project service automation was the predecessor to project operations. So what they're doing is they're upgrading people into project operations as part of their rollout. So a couple things to note with that is if you're on PSA right now, basically what they're going to do is they're going to have 3 waves that they're going to go through and then upgrade your environment to project operations. And they've got it in 3 waves because they've got customers that don't use any work breakdown structures, they have customers that have simple work breakdown structures, and then they have customers that have complex work breakdown structures. So they're releasing in waves then this upgrade where you're going to see really the rebranding of project service automation in your workspace to project operations. So something to note that that's coming down the pike. The other aspect too that we wanted to announce really with project operations, it's pretty common in projects to use subcontractors. We now have the ability to actually go through and reference on T&M and fixed bid billing agreements or projects that we want to use subcontractors for that. And we've got reporting and different concepts in place then with project operations so that you can make choices to be able to see, do I want to use a subcontractor or not as part of really that process? So nice in that regard to have some of those capabilities. So now we're moving more to the model-driven or Dataverse apps, right? So we're out of FinOps apps, and now we're in Dataverse, or what they call model-driven apps, and we're at Dynamics 365 Sales. One tidbit of information for you guys. Did you know that Dynamics 365 Sales, or the Sales Hub, or Sales Professional, is a model-driven app? So if you buy that and you want to see what kind of an app you could create in your organization, you could create that because the tools on the Power Platform are exactly what we use inside of Dynamics 365 for sales, right?
Yep.
Couple
That's
things.
an important point.
I know, right?
People lose sight of that sometimes.
They're like, I'm buying D365 Sales. It's like, yeah, you're just buying an app that they built on on a development platform called the Power Platform, right? So that's a
Yep.
cool
You
concept.
too could build one.
Exactly, right? You too.
Yep.
So let's go through this. Dynamics 365 sales highlights. They've got this lead quality with data hygiene point that they identified that I just want to drill in just a little bit with it. So imagine AI, once again, machine learning, right? Models that detects duplicates, invalid leads, additional data that may be in other data sources, and then allows you to automate how
Nice.
you interact with those leads. Do you want to update, delete, or close the lead so it actually never ever even hits a salesperson's queue, for example? Do you want it to automatically merge leads? So if the two leads have been entered, it's going to bring them together. Do you want to notify users that you've detected something weird with these particular leads and you want to do something with it? So this feature on its own for optimizing the lead and opportunity process that you go through within D365 sales, I think it's just absolutely huge in so many ways. Like it's such a basic feature, but it's so much easier from a functional perspective for a salesperson that's really trying to manage their lead opportunity quote process, right?
Well, and that would help with mass uploading and all that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah, huge, right?
Yep.
Because you got trade shows and you got two different trade shows now. Now you got an AI or ML that's looking through it, that's trying to figure out what at least those matches are to at least
Yep.
kind of convey it to you so you don't have two different salespeople going through the same opportunity, right?
Yep.
That never happens at where we're at, right? So lead routing then too, nice to know that there's going to be features in here that actually make it so that we can route automatically leads to the right salesperson or teams inside of D365 sales. Like I said, just some basic features that have a lot of powerful impacts with it. But one of the big focuses that we've seen, obviously, with D365 sales is really around teams. So when you start looking at the teams coupling with D365 sales, examples like note and tasks you can actually post in a chat or channel, and excuse me, you can post inside of a chat or channel, and that detail, that note or task that you create inside of teams will show up inside of a timeline then in D365 sales. You can
Very
edit,
cool.
for example, the record directly in Teams chat, so you can actually link now records, very similar, Marcus, to what you had shared with Business Central, but there's a
Yep.
textual page that pops up and you can make modifications then to it. You can share those records. You can create Teams meetings, so you can actually generate a meeting inside of D365, an appointment, and it will then create a team meeting for you. In D365, you can join then that meeting. You can then update the notes and data inside of Teams, and it goes and updates it inside of D365. And then you can use the conversation intelligence. And I know Britt probably loves this aspect of it. But for call analysis, sentiment information, like how is the call going, the transcription information. So when we talk about what application stack right now has most of the integration with Teams, by far D365 sales is really getting there. And
Yep.
then there's things like intelligent field augmentation that actually helps with predictive scoring for learning models that you can set up, so that way you can actually then really rate opportunities with more predictive scoring information that's on that particular opportunity. And I know we're getting to time here, so I'm just going to pop these up just really quickly. Field service, we had mobile app updates. We've got some functional and asset tree enhancements that were added to it. We've got a customer portal experience that's being introduced with field service so that customers can log in, see their bookings, track my technician, just like tracking my pizza, and then schedule for future bookings and rescheduling. They got feedback that the work order and the form for work orders and the ribbons needed simplification, and the new schedule board finally is going live here for general availability in this release, which just allows for a lot more capabilities than inside of here. And
Yep.
then just high level, other notable features. We just don't have time to cover every single thing. Customer service has the omni-channel voice on November 2021 that's launching. So now we can actually have in customer service not just bots and chat, but we can also interact with voice. So you've got supervisor monitoring and all that fun stuff that comes with that. Marketing now integrates with Azure Data Lake for customer journey orchestration. So you can actually see data lake details in the customer journey. It allows for webinar management, and it also allows for you now at any point of a customer journey that you set up to actually use Power Automate to do more powerful tasks as part of that process. So just like I said, high level, a lot of cool features inside of these other apps. We could spend a lot of time, obviously, on all of these. So,
Yeah. A lot of investment Microsoft is making here.
oh, huge, just
Yep.
absolutely huge. So,
Yep.
kind of with that, let me flip back over then to our just chatting. A lot of content that we covered. I've got to drop for another demonstration here. But what I do want to end with here as part of our conversation is that we have a couple of updates. So October 7th at 11, we are going to be going through Dataverse and Dynamics in review. Let's get technical. So we're going to have more of a deep dive, obviously, into Dynamics and Dataverse and some of the technical things that are going on in the background with that. And then on October 21st, we're going to be going through Dataverse and Dynamics in review as well, but we're going to be talking about the functional aspects of it. Examples of that. When should I use relationship management in BC? Never. And when should you use Dynamics
Just as a
365
preview.
sales, right? So let's talk through that, though, so everyone's
Yep.
at the same page. And then finally, on November 4th, challenging the development paradigm. Let's not develop in an application because we know the application and that's all we do. We need new ideas and concepts to be introduced with that. So that'll be really our last one that we'll be focusing on as well through this. That being said, Marcus, I think that's it. We got to
Yeah,
run.
that's good. Yeah.
Thank you all for
Thanks
joining,
for joining us.
and we will see you 2 weeks from now.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, guys.